Phoenix's story begins in the Arizona desert. In a valley sustained by the waters of the Salt River, the earliest permanent settlers recognized that this location, though harsh, possessed the essential ingredient for survival and growth. The Hohokam people had engineered canal systems centuries before, demonstrating that the desert could support organized communities through careful water management. When American settlers arrived in the mid-19th century, they adopted and expanded these principles, establishing Phoenix in 1868 as an agricultural community built upon irrigation. The city's initial architecture emerged directly from this purpose. Adobe buildings, constructed from sun-dried brick made from local clay, dominated the early settlement. These structures offered practical advantages in the desert climate, providing thermal mass that regulated temperature and using materials readily available on the landscape. The simple geometric forms and earthy tones of adobe architecture became the visual foundation of Phoenix, reflecting both necessity and an emerging aesthetic suited to place. The 1880s brought the railroad to Phoenix, an event that fundamentally altered the city's trajectory and architectural character. Rail connections linked Phoenix to regional and national markets, transforming it from an isolated agricultural settlement into a node within broader commercial networks. New populations arrived seeking economic opportunity, and investment capital flowed into local development. The architectural vocabulary of the city began to shift. Brick and stone construction appeared with increasing frequency, replacing or supplementing adobe. The permanence and formality of these materials signaled confidence in the city's future and ambitions to establish Phoenix as a significant urban center. Downtown Phoenix took organized shape during this period, with commercial buildings clustered around rail access points and main streets. These structures borrowed stylistic elements from American architectural traditions, incorporating Victorian details, Romanesque arches, and classical proportions. The grid street pattern, practical for organizing growth and accommodating commerce, was reinforced and extended. This rational planning framework, combined with new building materials and styles, created a visual transition from frontier settlement to established city. The early 20th century witnessed Phoenix's emergence as a more substantial metropolitan area. Wealth generated by Arizona's mining industry fueled ambitious construction projects. Civic pride manifested in public buildings designed to convey permanence and cultural aspiration. Schools, city halls, libraries, and courthouses were erected with architectural dignity. Commercial districts expanded vertically as well as horizontally, with multi-story buildings becoming more common in downtown areas. Residential neighborhoods began to develop distinct character, organized outward from the city center. Middle-class houses reflected contemporary American domestic architecture, adapted to the desert climate with modifications in fenestration, shading, and material selection. Architectural historians note that this period established patterns of neighborhood organization that would persist throughout the 20th century. The relationship between downtown commercial cores and residential peripheries followed models common across American cities. Yet Phoenix's response to desert conditions created distinctive variations in how buildings were sited, oriented, and detailed. Phoenix's climate and geography profoundly influenced how architecture evolved across all periods of the city's history. The intense solar radiation and extreme summer temperatures presented both challenges and opportunities for design innovation. Building orientation became significant. Structures were positioned to minimize west-facing exposure and maximize advantageous breezes. Deep eaves and covered porches provided shade and protected interior spaces from direct sun. Light-colored exterior finishes reflected heat rather than absorbing it. Courtyards and interior gardens, informed by Spanish colonial precedents and practical desert wisdom, created microclimates that moderated temperature and provided outdoor living space. These climate-responsive strategies were not merely functional. They shaped the aesthetic character of Phoenix architecture. The emphasis on horizontal lines, extended overhangs, and the integration of gardens created a distinctive visual vocabulary. As the city grew, these responses to environmental conditions became embedded in neighborhood character and building types, influencing development patterns across decades. The mid-20th century brought profound transformation to Phoenix's built environment. The city's population expanded dramatically following World War II, driven by improved air conditioning technology, which made desert living more comfortable, and by the city's appeal to retirees and young families seeking warm climates and new opportunities. This growth occurred at a scale that required entirely new neighborhoods and commercial districts. Modernist architectural principles found particular resonance in Phoenix. The clean lines, functional efficiency, and integration with landscape that characterized the modernist movement aligned well with desert conditions and contemporary aspirations. Residential architecture of this period emphasized open floor plans, glass walls that brought the landscape into living spaces, and minimal ornamentation. Architects designed homes that acknowledged the desert rather than fighting against it. Flat roofs, cantilevered overhangs, and horizontal emphasis became hallmarks of mid-century Phoenix residential design. Commercial and civic buildings reflected similar modernist sensibilities, with glass facades, steel frames, and geometric clarity defining the downtown skyline's evolving appearance. Urban planning decisions of the mid-20th century fundamentally shaped how Phoenix developed spatially. The automobile's centrality to American life influenced street layouts, commercial organization, and residential distribution. Shopping centers and commercial strips emerged along major thoroughfares, oriented toward automobile access, with large parking areas. The traditional downtown remained important, but commercial vitality increasingly dispersed across the metropolitan landscape. Residential development followed patterns of suburban expansion, with single-family homes on individual lots becoming the dominant housing type. Zoning regulations separated uses, creating distinct districts for commerce, residence, and light industry. This dispersed pattern of development, repeated across much of Phoenix during the post-war decades, created a sprawling metropolitan form quite different from the compact, walkable city centers that had developed in earlier periods. The scale of construction was immense. Entire neighborhoods were built within short time frames, creating visual homogeneity within districts while amplifying the overall diversity of the metropolitan landscape. The latter part of the 20th century introduced new architectural approaches while confronting questions of preservation and identity. Contemporary design movements, including postmodernism and regional modernism, influenced new buildings. Architects increasingly engaged with Phoenix's desert context consciously and explicitly, designing structures that responded to specific site conditions and climate. Some neighborhoods underwent renewal and rehabilitation as property owners recognized value in older structures. Historic districts began to receive formal recognition, prompting preservation efforts that sought to maintain significant buildings and streetscapes. The city developed a layered architectural character, with structures from different eras and design movements coexisting. Downtown Phoenix, in particular, showed evidence of this temporal layering, with early 20th century commercial buildings standing adjacent to glass-clad contemporary office towers. The visual landscape began to express the city's history more explicitly, with architectural variety making evident the passage of time and changes in construction practices, aesthetic values, and urban priorities. Preservation and adaptive reuse have become increasingly significant in recent decades as Phoenix has matured as a city. Historic neighborhoods, once considered obsolete or undesirable, have attracted renewed investment and attention. Buildings have been adapted for new purposes, with older commercial structures converted into residential lofts, offices, and cultural spaces. Historic preservation efforts have recognized the value of structures representing different periods, from late 19th century commercial blocks to mid-century modernist houses. These efforts have created awareness of architectural heritage as a community asset. Planning conversations now routinely engage with questions of how to accommodate growth while respecting historical character. Some neighborhoods have developed design guidelines that inform contemporary infill development, seeking visual coherence while allowing new construction. The recognition of architectural history has influenced how Phoenix understands itself, with the built environment serving as a tangible connection to the city's past. The architectural history of Phoenix reflects broader patterns of Western American urban development, yet shaped distinctly by desert location, climate, and the specific economic and social forces that drove growth. The city's buildings tell the story of how settlers adapted to an arid landscape, how transportation networks and commerce reshaped communities, and how design philosophies evolved across generations. Adobe structures gave way to brick and stone. These, in turn, were supplemented by concrete, steel, and glass. Each architectural period represented responses to its particular conditions and possibilities. Early 20th century civic buildings expressed confidence in urban permanence. Mid-century modernism embraced new materials and open planning. Contemporary architecture engages consciously with environmental context and historical awareness. The desert landscape that first drew settlers continues to shape how Phoenix is built and how residents experience the city. The relationship between building and environment, between individual structures and neighborhood patterns, between past and present remains visible in the architectural fabric. Understanding Phoenix's architecture provides insight into how cities evolve, how decisions made in earlier periods continue to influence present conditions, and how the past remains embedded within the contemporary urban landscape. The city's diverse architectural legacy, spanning from 19th century adobe to contemporary design, constitutes a continuous record of human adaptation, aspiration, and engagement with place.